I am not a fan of fear-mongering, but there is reason to be afraid. Did you know that by the time you hit the age of 20, you lose about 10% of range of motion or limb range of motion, flexibility basically, for every decade that you live. So if we only focus on posterior chain mobility, if by the ripe old age of 20 you're flexible enough to bend forward and touch your toes, by the time you are 50 you will barely be able to touch your knees, which is a very scary thought in my opinion. To offset this problem, I am using one of my only superpowers, which is connection. For every single discipline that I teach, I know at least one person that is 10 times as good or efficient in it as I am, and these people are usually very much open to helping us out. So today we have 2 single exercises that you can focus on for the rest of your life. If you're working them for only 5 to 10 minutes, let's just say a day, you will be more than flexible and limber when you get older, which means that the quality of life you're going to have is going to be a lot better. So I'm going to be at the studio in a minute and I'll see you there.
Starting with the bridge exercise first. Now keep in mind that this is a far more advanced level than I've been working on myself, but this is basically what we can look forward to. I've chosen the bridge because it is a complete anterior chain mobility exercise, meaning starting at our hands, moving up our arms, opening up our chest and shoulders, stretching out our abdominals, and down to our hip flexors, quadriceps and tibialis, as well as our ankle mobility. Everything is right there in this one movement. So working step on step on the bridge will basically get you set up for all the anterior chain mobility that you will ever require in your entire life. And of course, all the exercise we'll be using to get into this position will be very much beginner friendly, so you're welcome to try them out even if you have zero mobility at all. To demonstrate, our first stretch is for our tibialis, or the front side of our lower leg, by just pointing our feet. Now as a bonus, and to get a little bit more of a passive stretch, we're gonna use a slight load on our foot to pull us a little bit more into this ankle extension, which is gonna help us get better into the bridge position. All you need for this is a kettlebell around your toes, and that's basically it. It can't be any easier than that. Which moves us to our second exercise. Starting in a lunging position, we're gonna stretch out our hip flexors and our quadriceps. All you need to do to achieve this stretch is start out in a lunge position, flex your glutes and your lower back and push forward as far as you can. Now, depending on the strength in your posterior chain, you're gonna be able to go deeper into the stretch, meaning the stronger that your glutes and your back are, the better you can push yourself deeper into the hip flexor stretch, including the quadriceps, and maybe just a little bit of stretch in your lower abdominals as well. Don't forget, of course, to do both sides. Try and stay as upright as possible in your upper body. Relax for just a couple of seconds, and then we're going to repeat this whole process again. We're going to get into programming how often and how many times and how long to hold later. And once you're done with the stretch, sit back and relax all the muscles you've been pulling on. This combination is highly effective because not only are we now stretching out our anterior chain, but we're also having a little bit more mobility for our posterior chain by sitting back and by grabbing our toes as if we were doing a hamstring mobility exercise. Which moves us to our next exercise. And you might have noticed by now that we are favoring some of the more passive stretches, as you can see here, because they are simply just too easy to do. All you need is a kettlebell and some kind of elevation to put your back on, because we're going to literally bend over backwards for this one. Depending on your mobility, you can start out with very low weight and increasing the intensity of the stretch by increasing the weights over time. Now this one is obviously opening up our chest and our shoulders, and if you push your pelvis forward actively by flexing your glutes, you're gonna have, again, a little bit more of a stretch in your hip flexors and your quadriceps, as you can see, by pushing upward actively. And when it comes to how long, we will be holding for 30 seconds, and that is for every single static stretch that we are doing, because that is the most effective time. As for how often, we'll see that later. Exercise number 4, all you require for that one is simply a wall, and you're gonna place your hands backwards pointing down to the floor, and depending on your mobility in your lumbar spine, thoracic spine, and even in your hip flexors, you can move down as low as you feel is acceptable for you without feeling any pain and without overdoing it. So if you're at the beginner level, you're gonna stay at the very top just like so. You already have a nice little stretch in your entire anterior chain, and especially in your hands. If you haven't worked on that, this will be the next exercise. But for now, just bend backwards, push your hands against the wall, And try and actively push your chest upwards by flexing your back and your glutes. Moving on to the last piece of the puzzle, our arm mobility, especially our forearm mobility, because most people don't actually stretch those and most people will be a little bit more tense there. So place your hands pointing towards your knees and extend your arms fully. By now you can move backwards and forwards just a little bit until you see your hand actually leaving the ground. So this is the end of your mobility or range of motion. Once they start leaving, just move forward again. Just be sure not to apply too much pressure from the top down because we do not want to get hurt in our joints. Now every single one of the 30-second static stretches we will do 3 or 4 times in a row with a short break of 15 to 20 seconds between every single set. This will make sure that we have adequate relaxation between every single set, as well as 30 seconds or a long enough period for benefiting from the stretch itself. And now we are finally ready to lay down on our backs and to raise up into a bridge position. Now, depending on where you are more flexible, you might have more of a bend in your lumbar spine, you might have more of a bend in your knees or in your arms, but in general, this is an entire anterior chain stretch, meaning every single muscle at the front side of your body is being stretched right now, which is absolutely amazing for a single exercise. Done with our anterior chain, we can move to the split or the posterior chain stretch, especially with this extra move of bending forward and trying to touch our toes in the split itself. With this one, we have starting again at our toes all the way. Our calves, our hamstrings, our glutes, lower back, upper back and shoulders are basically getting a nice little stretch. And combined with the bridge pose, the anterior mobility exercise, we have basically gone through every single muscle group into both directions. As usual, starting at the bottom and working our way up, all we need is some kind of elevation for our toes to place upon, and we can move on close to a wall just to hold on. And as you can see here, we're basically doing the opposite of the first exercise we did for the bridge pose, meaning that we're stretching the posterior chain, our calves, our hamstrings, and depending on how low you go with your upper body, you will have even a gluteal stretch or a lumbar stretch. But for now, use it to focus on your calves. Exercise number 2, of course, moving up, will be a hamstring and glute stretch, and for this one all we want to do is bend our legs, grab them as strongly as we can and then extend them only to the level that we can without having too much pain. Now we can get into intensity, because intensity is very important. According to the latest studies, high intensity stretching is of course the most beneficial, but then comes low intensity before medium intensity stretching. So do with that as you will, but for now I would suggest that we try and keep it in the lower pain range minimum, meaning that if you feel a slight pull that is painful in your hamstrings, that is absolutely acceptable and probably very good, but if it starts hurting a lot, that is a sign for you to back down a little bit. Next up, an exercise that I teach in all of my classes, and that is the cat-cow, because it will help us activate our spinal mobility, especially in the flexion, a little bit more, and that is exactly what we're going to need when it comes to the split. Spinal flexion is basically just referring to rounding your back, and here we want to do it actively as far as we can. So extend your shoulders, and you can take a short little break by moving backwards in between, and then once you're ready, move down again into the full spinal flexion or thoracic flexion, because we're focusing more on our upper body. And this might be the first really dynamic exercise where we switch between poses, hold for just a couple of seconds and then repeat once again. Extend your shoulders as far as you can, try and push your back upwards by flexing your upper abdominals, and as you can see here, we're trying to round as much as we can. As for hand placement, I would suggest just turn them outwards just a little bit so we do not have too much pressure on our joints. And believe it or not, these are all the exercises that you will require to get into a nice split position. However, as mentioned before, we don't want to just stay upright in the split, but we also want to bend forward as far as we can, just to add a little bit more stretch on our glutes and on our upper back, as well as a little bit more mobility in our shoulders by pulling them forward as much as we can. Also, be sure to actively push your hips down towards the ground so we have enough stretch in our hip flexors. As to how you get into the stretch, the more limber you are, you can even just slide into the split if you prefer to do that, or just move in there slowly at your own pace. That's totally up to you. What is more important is that we repeat once again 30 seconds for every single stretch that we hold statically. We do 3 repetitions for every single stretch for every single side. We take 15 to 20 second breaks between every single set that we do. And we relax between every single stretch by moving to the other direction, meaning that if we point our toes to stretch our tibialis, then we do the opposite by raising our toes at the front to stretch out our gastrocnemius and soleus, which is basically just a superset for stretching. With that said, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was somewhat helpful. If you liked the video, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see y'all tomorrow because we have new videos every single day. Captain Cairo, peace out.